Hi, I'm Paul from Suzuki, and we're here today to talk about the new Suzuki GSX-S1000 GX. We're going to look at some of the headlines and also talk about some of the spec in detail. So talking about those headlines, it's got full semi-active suspension from Showa, front and rear. It's got a suite of rider aids to give rider every support they need. It's a true sports crossover bike with long travel suspension, long distance comfort, and a sports-derived GSX-R engine. So to help me talk about that today, I've got Steve here, who's our product expert. So Steve, tell me about, first of all, the electronic suspension.
So there's an awful lot here to help riders out and get the very best from each and every ride on the GX, Paul. First of all, the rear preload. So as you say, both the front and rear are electronically adjustable. So with the rear preload, there's a fantastic auto adjust setting. So using the stroke sensor inside the rear shock, it'll automatically sense whether it's just one rider, whether they've got luggage, whether they've got a pillion, and it'll automatically move to maintain the posture of the bike when you're at a standstill before you head off on your ride. Or, if you prefer, easily visible by the dash, you can change it specifically to that 1-up, 2-up, or luggage setting if you prefer.
Right, okay, so that's great. So you can just get on the bike and ride it, or you can make some settings as you go. And Steve, I've heard about Skyhook being mentioned. So how do we describe that at Suzuki? What does it mean?
Okay, so as well as the preload adjust, you've got options for hard, medium and soft, as one would expect with semi-active suspension. And over and above that, you've got an ability to fine tune each of those by plus or minus 3 points of each of the hard, medium and soft. But as you say, a really important facet of the semi-active suspension is this idea that if the bike were suspended by a hook in the sky, trying to keep that top line of the handlebars and where the rider's sat static, and letting the really comprehensive suspension and wheels and tyres soak up all the bumps, whether they be small bumps that are high frequency or more undulating, less frequent bumps. And what we're looking to do here is maintain a really fine balance. It's not about using everything the suspension can do, because then that can generate a vague feeling for the rider. So it's trying to smooth the ride out and keep the rider really nice and planted where they're sat, but allowing the suspension to really dial out those bumps while still giving all the feel and all the exhilaration that this bike's capable of.
So do you think you still feel quite connected? Because you mentioned that vagueness, and I think that's perhaps some people's worries about electronic suspension, but you mentioned that connectedness and the feeling of, you know, enjoying the ride, which is obviously why we're here.
Yeah, connected is the word. It's such an important part of the motorcycle riding experience, to feel like you're sat in the bike and you on the machine are at one and enjoying your riding experience and your surroundings. So absolutely, it's about stepping in and helping improve comfort, improving performance dynamics where the technology can, but really maintaining that fabric and that connection between the rider and the bike.
No, that's great. What about, you know, when you're barreling along, you've got your pillion and luggage on the back, and then you come into a corner, so you're onto the anchors, and what's the electronic suspension doing then?
So this is one of the really special features about the Suzuki version of this semi-active system, Paul. Once you encounter, say, cobbles or some high frequency surface that would ordinarily start to disturb the bike a little bit, there's two really key things that will change on the GX to make it an even more beneficial ride for the rider. The first is the throttle response. So instead of getting any unintended throttle input as a result of hitting lots of little bumps like those cobblestones, it will slightly dampen the throttle input so that you can maintain the performance level that you're looking for from the engine. Also, what we talked about before with the hook in the sky concept, there's also a change here as well. There's actually two different settings for that overarching system. The primary base setting is all about the responsiveness and the sporty crossover nature of this bike. But when you do hit those bumps, it will then change that to be a slightly softer setting that will help you and the bike navigate onto smoother tarmac and then go back to being fully responsive again.
Okay, but that sounds like a lot for me as the rider to think about when I'm suddenly approaching a changing surface. But do I have to do anything, or is the bike doing this for me?
This is where the whole rider aid concept comes in. It's all about elevating the level of experience for the rider. This is all the hard work that's done by the engineers with the hardware and technology and all the calibration. So all this is happening seamlessly to get the best possible riding outcome and experience for the rider and their passenger.
And is there anything else around that electronic suspension, Steve, that we haven't talked about yet? Because it sounds like a lot already.
Yep, there's a huge amount in there. I think what you touched on before is absolutely key, which is making it easier for the rider to access. We've got a fantastic 6.5-inch colour TFT screen for riders to quickly see what settings they've selected, whether that's for their preload, whether it's for the damping characteristic, and with the really nice, small but easy to access switchgear on the left-hand side. It's easy to get to, easy to change, and when you're on the move as well.
So Steve, there's a lot of electronic rider aids on this bike. Let's talk about rider modes first of all. What's the bike got?
So we've got rider modes, 3 different settings, A, B and C. A being active, B being basic, and C being comfort. And this governs the power modes for the bike, so the performance you're going to get out of the engine. What comes up on the dash is TC, but it's actually something called TLR control. I'm sure we'll get more into that in a moment. And then also the suspension settings as well that we've spoken about in detail.
Okay, so you mentioned TC there and TLR. TC, I'm familiar with that, but tell us what's TLR.
So we've got TC shown on the dash because exactly as you say, within the industry, reasonably universally understood as traction control, and it's something that most people are familiar with. But given the level of sophistication on this bike, it goes even further. So TLR control, the T being traction control, the L being lift control, and then the R is for roll torque control.
Okay, so traction control, tick. Lift control, wheelie control?
Anti-wheelie, exactly that.
Okay, anti-wheelie, that's great. And then roll torque control, that I'm not so familiar with, so tell us a bit more detail there.
So roll torque control is something new, and it's a preemptive system. With traction control, even the best traction control systems, that is reacting to when you've got wheel speed differential and slide that the rider may not want. Where roll torque control comes in is, before we even get to that situation, it's looking at the lean angle data from the IMU, and it's looking at the vehicle's velocity. And for a set of those 2 parameters, it's looking at what is the optimum amount of engine performance for those parameters. And it's then limiting the amount of torque to make sure that you get through and out of the corner as best you can.
Okay, and do you have any control over how much of that is sort of controlled by the ECU?
Absolutely, it's a key thing with the rider aids that these need to be dialed into the conditions and the experience of the rider so they get the riding experience they want from the machine. It's there to elevate the whole experience. So within what you see as TC on the dash, you've got 7 different settings, and the bigger the number, the more proactive the system is, and that's across all 3 facets of both traction, lift, anti-wheelie, and also that roll torque control, and also the ability to completely disengage the system, which will disengage all 3 if the rider so chooses.
Okay, but just back to that simplicity that we talked about before, I think it's one of the key things about the way Suzuki engineer our bikes, is that there's a lot going on there, but if you choose, really it's just down to A, B or C.
100%, Paul. It's fantastic to have the rider aids to take our engines and chassis to the next level and to make them more usable and more attainable for a wider group of riders, but it's got to be simple to use and intuitive. It shouldn't require a degree in electronics to operate these things. So it's about clear dashes, attractive, easy to use switchgear, and just intuitive use on the move.
Okay, so what about other rider aids? Quick shifter?
Bi-directional as standard, so that's up and down without using the clutch as soon as you're rolling in first gear.
Okay, cruise control?
Yes.
Okay, and there's something about cruise control. You can change gear with the cruise control on, and cruise control keeps going, so you've got some more latitude there.
Yeah, so the last 2 items we talked about, the cruise control and the bi-directional quick shifter, work together on this bike. So you can use the quick shifter up and down, and the cruise control system will continue to operate within the speed range that you've set.
Right, okay. And what about the dashboard? Obviously you're looking at that all the time you're traveling. What's that telling you? How does that interact?
Yep, so a key piece in terms of the rider's eye line, so if they are quickly glancing away from the road in front of them, they need to be able to see that information quickly and easily so they can get on with enjoying their ride. What you've got on there is smartphone connectivity and a real clear display. It's got a light sensor in there as well, so it can adapt between day and light. And again, putting the rider at the heart of everything. If you prefer, as a lot of people do, say the night mode, so the black display, it looks really, really stunning. You can set that as your default if you wish.
Right, okay, so you've got some control there and you've got connectivity. And Steve, looking at the beautiful bikes here, you know, you can really see the long travel suspension, and we talk about this as being a sport crossover bike. Why is that? What does that description mean?
So crossover is taking the best from 2 different types of bikes. With it being a sports crossover, it's taking the performance and dynamic elements of a sports tourer, but then the riding position stance and some of the aesthetics of an adventure bike.
Okay, so what does that mean in the front here? You see you've obviously got a large fairing there, you've got an upright riding position. How have the engineers developed that to really work for this category?
So the long travel suspension means that we can sit the rider slightly higher, so they've got even greater levels of comfort. The handlebars are closer to the rider, and the bars are nice and wide as well, so can exert lots of control as you're riding the machine. But as you say, protection for something that's really comfortable and can do an all-day ride, to have that level of protection as well. So it's why you've got the screen, why you've got the frontal bodywork. So it looks aggressive and sharp and attractive and dynamic, like the chassis and the engine experience are, but also giving a good level of coverage to the rider against the elements as well.
Okay, and you talked about dynamics there, and that word, you know, sport crossover is really important on this bike, that's part of it. So where does the sportiness come from here?
Engine and chassis pool. So at the engine's heart, you've got a GSX-R derived engine with 152 PS, 106 Newton meters of torque, and those are just the peak figures. There is a colossal amount of mid-range from this engine, and any gear, low down in the RPM, a huge amount of thrust out of the corners as well. So as you hit those apexes and pick it up on the throttle, you're going to be grinning from ear to ear. But it's not just the engine. The frame itself, a sporting design, an aluminium twin spar construction, and an aluminium swing arm as well. So mechanically translating really, really responsive, involving experiences for the rider as they go through those corners, no matter what kind of riding they're doing.
Okay, sounds fantastic, and that engine is a peach, isn't it? So,
Indeed.
I think we're really both delighted to see that engine here in this bike again. Talk to me about comfort and the pillion comfort and what's going on there. You can see obviously we've got an accessorised bike here with luggage, etc., and different seating. Why is that?
So we talked about some of the comfort for the rider, but as you say, this kind of bike's not only going to be used just by a solo rider. The ability to do multi-day tours, so the requirement for optional hard luggage as well, and the panniers are 36 litres each, and the pillion comfort as well. On the green bike we've got behind us, you've got a comfort design seat that's an optional accessory for both the rider and the pillion, and having a wide usable area for that pillion passenger on those longer rides as well.
Okay, so it's great. So it sounds like a really great all-round package, doesn't it?
Yeah, such an exciting addition to the range pool. Can't wait.
Yeah, brilliant. So there it is, the Suzuki GSX-S1000 GX. Semi-active suspension from Showa, a great suite of rider electronics, and a true crossover style with sport at its heart. In fact, we'd call it the ultimate sport crossover. So please get down to your dealership, start talking to them now about how you could get your new Suzuki ride. See you again.